What would drive a man to embrace death rather than live dishonored? For centuries, the samurai of feudal Japan have been revered for their unwavering devotion to honor. But what lies beneath the surface of the famous phrase, death before dishonor? Could it be more than just a battle cry? What were they truly sacrificing, and why did they believe it was worth it? The Sengoku period in Japan, an era marked by chaos, bloodshed, and the clash of powerful clans, was the crucible in which the samurai's most defining principles were forged. Among these principles, none was more sacred than the Bushido code, which governed their lives with rigid clarity. Yet it was within this very code that one phrase became synonymous with the samurai ethos: death before dishonor. But what does this phrase truly mean? Was it simply a call to die in battle, to face one's end with a sword in hand? Or does it represent something far deeper and more philosophical? To understand the meaning of death before dishonor is to unlock the very heart of the samurai's existence. This documentary takes you beyond the surface, into the complex worldview of the Sengoku-era samurai, exploring their intimate relationship with life, death, and the sacredness of their honor. At its core, the concept of death before dishonor challenges one of the most fundamental human instincts, the desire to preserve life at all costs. What could possibly lead a warrior to abandon that instinct? What could make him choose a path that seemingly leads to nothing but ruin? For the samurai, the idea was not one of blind death, but of transcendence. It was a refusal to allow the fragility of the human body to dictate the worth of a person. But while this belief was part of their cultural and spiritual fabric, it wasn't without its own tensions. Would following this rigid, honor-bound philosophy in the midst of war and violence ultimately lead to personal destruction? And what does it mean for a society that elevates such a belief to the highest order of virtue? To explore the true meaning behind death before dishonor, we must first understand the origins of this code and how it intersected with the deeply spiritual and philosophical elements of samurai life. The origins of the Bushido code trace their roots to the early years of feudal Japan. This period, long before the Sengoku era, was marked by feudal lords seeking control over land, resources, and people. The samurai, initially serving as warrior retainers to these powerful lords, began to evolve into a distinct class with their own customs and ideologies. During these early years, samurai were known primarily for their martial prowess. However, as Japan's society grew more complex, the samurai also had to adapt, integrating not only combat skills but also intellectual, cultural, and spiritual practices into their lives. Over time, the concept of Bushido, or the way of the warrior, developed as a guiding philosophy for the samurai. However, it wasn't simply a matter of martial skill. The samurai were expected to embody a set of virtues that transcended mere battlefield performance. Bushido required loyalty, respect, rectitude, righteousness, courage, and self-control. But most importantly, it demanded an intimate relationship with the concept of honor. For the samurai, honor wasn't just a personal attribute. It was an obligation to their family, clan, and even to the gods. This concept of honor intertwined with the very fabric of Japanese spirituality, drawing heavily from both Shintoism and Buddhism. The samurai's deep commitment to Bushido required them to view their actions not only through the lens of personal integrity, but also from the perspective of cosmic and spiritual balance. Shintoism, the indigenous religion of Japan, teaches that everything in nature, be it a rock, a tree, or a person, has a spirit, kami. In this worldview, the samurai believed that to act dishonorably was to disrupt the divine order, to defy the kami, and to pollute the purity of one's own soul. Similarly, Buddhism, which had a deep influence on the samurai, emphasized impermanence and the transitory nature of life. The samurai were taught that death was inevitable, and that their actions during life would ultimately determine their spiritual journey. Thus, honor became a means of connecting to the divine and achieving a sense of spiritual transcendence. The core tenet of Bushido, particularly the phrase death before dishonor, reflects a fundamental belief in the transience of life and the importance of living with integrity. This philosophy didn't glorify death for death's sake, but saw it as a natural and inevitable part of the samurai's existence. It was death, when approached with honor, that could elevate the samurai's soul, sending it to a higher spiritual plane. In practical terms, this meant that the samurai were trained to die in the same way they were trained to live, with focus, precision, and intentionality. The samurai saw their life as a series of actions that would culminate in their inevitable death. This wasn't just about dying in battle, but about facing death on their own terms, in accordance with their code. Seppuku, or ritual suicide, became an important part of the samurai's relationship with death. This act was not one of cowardice, but of profound spiritual and moral commitment. It allowed the samurai to restore their honor when it had been tainted by defeat, disgrace, or failure. Through seppuku, the samurai could control their exit from this world, choosing to die with dignity rather than living in shame. The very concept of seppuku illustrates the importance the samurai placed on honor. The ritual wasn't simply about ending one's life, but about doing so in a way that preserved the warrior's integrity. The method itself was elaborate and precise, involving a ceremonial sword, and often a trusted second who would end the samurai's life after the initial act. This act wasn't only symbolic, it was a declaration that the samurai's soul would not be tainted by disgrace. It was an acknowledgement that the warrior's death, when done honorably, could preserve their spiritual purity. While seppuku was an extreme measure, the idea of death before dishonor permeated all aspects of the samurai's life. Every decision, whether in the battlefield, in a court of law, or even in their personal relationships, had to reflect the samurai's commitment to honor. A samurai's entire existence was a balancing act between living with integrity and preparing for death. In war, this meant that samurai were expected to demonstrate unmatched courage, fighting without fear and without hesitation. To retreat from battle, to abandon one's comrades, was seen as a dishonorable act, one that would stain the warrior's name forever. Yet, paradoxically, the concept of death before dishonor also had its darker side. The samurai were often forced into difficult moral quandaries, where the lines between loyalty and self-preservation were not always clear. A samurai could be ordered to commit acts of violence or betrayal in the name of loyalty to their lord. These moments placed the samurai at a crossroads, where their commitment to Bushido could conflict with the harsh realities of their duties. For example, when a samurai's lord was defeated in battle, the samurai was expected to follow the code of loyalty, often choosing to die in battle or commit seppuku to maintain their honor. But what if that loyalty led them to fight for a leader who was unjust, or whose actions were morally dubious? Could a samurai choose to break away from this loyalty and live, or did they have no choice but to die in service to their master? These were the ethical dilemmas that samurai faced, and they often had to make difficult choices that would determine not just their lives, but their spiritual fates. Take, for example, the famous story of the 47 Ronin, a group of samurai who sought vengeance after the wrongful death of their master, Asano Naganori. After Asano was forced to commit seppuku after attacking a corrupt official named Kira Yoshinaka, the 47 Ronin, led by Oishi Yoshio, swore vengeance. They waited patiently for 2 years, enduring hardship and maintaining their cover as ordinary men. Finally, they attacked Kira's residence, killing him and restoring their master's honor. After the mission was completed, the Ronin surrendered to the authorities and chose seppuku to preserve their honor. The story of the 47 Ronin illustrates the depth of the samurai's commitment to loyalty and honor. Despite knowing that their actions would lead to their own deaths, the Ronin saw it as their duty to restore their master's honor, even at the cost of their lives. This extreme loyalty wasn't just a form of blind obedience. It was deeply rooted in the samurai's understanding of honor as something sacred and spiritual. For them, their loyalty was a bond not just to their lord, but to the very order of the universe. To betray that bond would be to dishonor the divine and tarnish the samurai's soul. The pivotal moment in the philosophy of death before dishonor came not just in moments of physical battle, but in instances of profound spiritual crisis. One of the most famous examples of this comes from the life of the warlord Oda Nobunaga, who, in 1582, faced an unexpected betrayal. A trusted general, Akechi Mitsuhide turned on Nobunaga, leading to the brutal death of the warlord. Mitsuhide's actions sent shockwaves through the samurai world, raising the question, could such an honorable death be prevented? The samurai's view of loyalty was often uncompromising, and the consequences of betrayal were considered more horrific than any death in battle. In the case of Nobunaga's demise, many samurai chose seppuku to maintain their honor in the wake of his death, believing that any other course of action would have been a disgrace. They acted swiftly, not out of fear of death, but from the deeply ingrained belief that without honor, life itself was meaningless. The moral dilemma created by such actions reveals a fascinating layer of samurai thought. Was their commitment to death before dishonor a philosophical stance, or simply a desperate escape from a life without dignity? To this day, the question remains. For some, it was a declaration of inner strength. For others, a tragic result of the crushing demands placed upon the samurai by the world they inhabited. Death before dishonor was more than just a saying. It was a powerful testament to the samurai's relationship with life and death. The idea was rooted in an understanding of mortality that permeated every aspect of the warrior's existence, from their training to their final moments. It was a philosophy shaped by the stark realities of war and betrayal, but also by the belief that one's honor was not just personal, but spiritual, a bond with the very forces that governed existence. At the heart of this philosophy was a refusal to live without purpose, without the integrity that defined a person's soul. For the samurai, death was not to be feared. Dishonor was the true enemy. And so, when faced with the prospect of losing their honor, they chose the one thing they could control, their death. To dive deeper into the untold stories of Japan's greatest warriors, subscribe to the channel and continue exploring the philosophies that shaped their world.